if you shrink the funnel right at the top on that first interview to the right set of candidates, and you have a high degree of fidelity on what's good and what's bad at that point, all the effort downstream can be saved, right? And that's a massive win for any org.
Welcome to The Next Moves. My name's Joe Diubaldo, and for the past 25 years, I've been helping people build careers and build amazing companies. And the truth I've learned is that we all get stuck at different times. And I want to help you get unstuck, plan your next move and the move after that. And I think the best way to do that is to look at the choices that some of our guests had in front of them and the moves that they made. Let's take a listen.
Welcome, Abe. I appreciate you making time for this. I know that you're pretty busy with a full-time job and trying to drive forward the future of generative AI and AI in general. Thanks, man.
No worries. Glad to be here.
So I want to start the conversation by giving a quick background on you, and maybe you could walk us through what you do now and what you've done before, because I think that, even from what you graduated with to what you're doing now, it's been an interesting journey.
Sounds great. Yeah. So I think I'll start off right now and I'll scroll backwards, a little bit of a reverse chronology. So I'm a senior product manager at a company called Odaia. So I manage their machine learning platform. So helping them build out things like their training and inference engines, pipelines, as well as look at things like feature stores and, of course, their entire generative AI strategy as well. Prior to joining Odaia, I was at a venture capital firm called Georgian, where I kind of ran their quant investment engine. So this is using machine learning to kind of find out the best startups to kind of invest in, help direct a couple of $100 million worth of deal flow. Of course, if you scroll back, I had an entire career in investment banking and in equities research, completely different outside of tech. Prior to that, of course, university, where I did engineering and economics double major as my undergrad. Somewhere along the lines, I also did an MBA at UFD. Somehow, I always find a way for more education. That's just me.
That's true, actually. The whole philosophy around this show is helping people get unstuck and make the next move. And I think that there's two ways that we can look at your background, which is you've spent a lot of time helping companies think about their next move, and you've also made some interesting moves in your own career. If I were to look at what you've done most recently, I think I would be negligent if I didn't ask you about the nature of your job with Georgian, because everyone's always thought, hey, I'd love to be part of a VC. I'd love to be part of the tech community. You had a pretty specific role in there that a lot of people don't get access to. So why don't you tell us what the typical roles are, and why don't you talk about what you ended up doing within the organization with your team?
Sounds great. So yeah, the typical roles in a VC are kind of divided between your investment team, which is mostly focused on sourcing startups, doing due diligence on them, and then closing the deals, and of course managing the portfolio of existing investments. Eventually, they're also somewhat responsible, most of the time, for exiting. So finding a buyer for those portfolio companies, maybe 7 to 10 years after the initial investment. In some firms, that latter bit goes to a corporate dev or corp dev office or a team that is specialized in exits. Outside of investments, there's usually a portfolio or portfolio improvement or operations team. So they intend to work with the startups to engage in better methodologies in terms of sales, marketing, internal ops, so on and so forth. They coach the startups on how to scale up in an efficient manner, things like that. What made Georgian unique was we also had a research team and an ML research team, as well as a product and engineering team. So when you think about what Georgian was trying to do, is they're trying to isolate their value add to, hey, we are not just going to do this typical VC thing, which is, hey, here's how you scale efficiently. Here's some introductions to some banks or some large institutions that can scale up your top line. Their advantage was more around, hey, we can enhance your machine learning, and we can enhance your machine learning platforms. We can help you do ML research to improve the quality of your ML models, because we mostly invested in AI startups as well. My specific role, which is slightly different than all of those, and that's relatively new, and I kind of started off that entire thing at Georgian, was to take the product and research expertise that we had over there and build an internal quant investment system. So what does this really entail? It really means that how can we take those, 50,000 to 100,000 startups in the world, probably about 10,000 within our investment range, and really collapse that down to a few hundred that could really generate value. Thinking about these 6x or even this decacorns that are coming out of the pile. Over the course of research, we identified a lot of signals that could indicate future success. A lot of the typical ones that people are oftentimes look at today, your LinkedIn employee growth and things like that, but also the non-obvious ones, which can't really talk about. I don't know.
Why not? Tell us, please. We want to know.
The interesting thing about it, though, is that we essentially, looking at how effective the system was, more than tripled the ability or the probability of finding a really good startup as a result of the machine learning prioritization, if you want to call it, kind of in-house. So when I was there, it started off as, and this is the typical 0 to 1 product journey. It started off as just an idea in the back of my head in an Excel file, right? Yeah. That's literally how it started. How it ended around the time that I left was basically a 15-person team, right? That was managing it. We had a data platform. We had a machine learning system. We had entire UX UI that we were testing in house. Not sure where that ended up. It's been like a little while now since I've been at Georgian. And you've seen, we were an early starter in that space. We were probably about a couple of years ahead of a lot of the other folks. There are these companies or VCs like Signalfire that almost exclusively focus and source through their AI and ML systems. This Index Ventures now also has hired one of the major partners out of Signalfire. They're actually running now their own little quant team on the inside and data team on the inside. And there's a whole host of others that are now using generative AI, not at the sourcing level, but one level below at the due diligence level. How do I absorb the information from the startup? How do I ask intelligent questions of the data, and automate that really heavy component as well. Because sourcing is tough. It's a probability game. Due diligence is an effort and productivity game. So that's where generative AI really shines as well.
So I want to drill into something that you said to me before, and I like the frame because I think frames allow us to think through things. And, you said that you look at everything as a funnel, and a funnel is a funnel is a funnel. So can you just break that out for me, what it means for the audience that's listening to this, and why this was relevant as you're looking at AI?
Sounds good. So I think I'll go back to the origination of this. When we built the internal quant investment system, like we're talking about optimizing the kind of the investment funnel. How do we source initial startups, get down to like the first layer of due diligence, then dive on, and how to use AI to kind of prioritize which things to look at, and even surface up the right kinds of information along the way. What we realized was a lot of the workflows in our portfolios of startups, like whether you're talking marketing, sales, operations, anything, it ends up being a series of items or tasks. Whether it's leads to be processed, whether it's tickets to be processed in your customer service, whatever it is, the funnel process is largely the same. There's a series of things that are stocked at different stages of the process. There's flows between them. We need to prioritize things between those items. And AI, in general, the traditional AI that we think about things, is very good at the prioritization elements. Generative AI is extremely good at the processing of these items. So hey, do I need to do data entry to move things from funnel stage 1 to funnel stage 2? Well, generative AI systems today can help out with that in a massive way. Do I need to ask form entry? I would make decisions and fill in how good is this thing according to a framework that I've built up. Well, now RAG systems in generative AI can do that as well.
What's RAG for the audience? RAG?
Yeah, so it's a retrieval augmented generation. So this is a methodology for inputting not just a question to the AI, but also the relevant context. So it has pull the answer from this relevant pieces of data. So you might throw it a PDF. As a simplified example, it's vastly simplified, but usually chunks of a PDF that are relevant to the question, and it'll come back with an answer saying, well, based on the context that you've given me, this is the answer, right, that you're kind of looking for. And it's simple. And if you think about any cognitive effort that a human has, right, it's really largely along those lines. Okay, I have a question. What's the context? What are the rules? How do I get to the answer? And we kind of logic our way in. And with generative AI, it at least imitates logic and to a certain extent. That's simplified logic. Obviously, generative AI systems haven't learned how to reason in the way that we think about reasoning yet.
So if you look at the funnel, and we were to look at funnel as a funnel and a funnel, and I want to think about the opportunities inside of a specific industry. And we can look at something as simple as, I mean, there's going to be recruiters that watch this, and we think about the sea of candidates and the sea of data that's out there for any specific role, and the ability to process that information and reduce it in some ways so that better judgment can be made. So when you're looking at the technologies that you deploy, I mean, everyone thinks, well, matching just seems very straightforward. Is there something more comprehensive that we're missing to get a better outcome for candidates, for clients?
Yeah. So if you're just using AI to prioritize existing information, that tends to be that game has been played for quite some time now, and there's very little juice left in that game. You had to be pretty good at things like causal inference and like understanding, hey, this particular set of features in like the person's resume or things like that will result in like a good candidate popping up in the interview. Where the interesting things lie are along two fronts. Number one is think about the HR funnel from your perspective. I presume, and this, forgive me if I get this wrong, the idea is that there's a set of candidates that you kind of identified either through a database that you have or through LinkedIn or other social sites that have like their full set of resumes, or even Indeed, or you might have some feeds into those kind of things. Then you kind of identify, here are your top candidates that you want to reach out to. So that's a workflow, right? Like we mentioned before, generative AI could help out with some of that elements, like automate the workflow, because you probably need to reach out to hundreds, if not thousands of candidates to really identify the best ones. Then you had to have that initial meeting, right? Once you have that initial meeting, there's that another workflow that goes along. What are the right questions to ask? How do I make sure this candidate is right for the series of jobs that I have on the other side? Because you're a two-sided platform, right? You have employers on the other side. You have to ask the intelligent questions. And then a lot of the times I've noticed, at least when I'm doing interviews at the product manager level in larger orgs, the HR department isn't a specialist in, let's say, AI and ML. So they ask very generic questions, and it's great. That's fine. But maybe there's an opportunity with generative AI, giving it the right context, the way that an engineer has. You can create like an AI agent, or a RAG agent, as they call it, a retrieval augmented generation agent, that has the context and can act as an expert hiring manager, like an engineer in machine learning, or a product director in machine learning. And can come up with a couple of really good questions and listen in on the conversation, and you can really start narrowing the funnel really early to the right candidates. Then everything downstream suddenly becomes easier, because
It does.
in funnel dynamics, suddenly if you shrink the funnel right at the top on that first interview to the right set of candidates, and you have a high degree of fidelity on what's good and what's bad at that point, all the effort downstream can be saved, right? And that's a massive win for any org. Your org, an HR department on the other side for like a Fortune 500 company probably will save thousands of hours a year, if that optimization could even be like 15%, right? And the way that the pace at which these things are moving, and there's a lot of startups in this space as well. Like there's everybody's seeing the opportunity. Funnel is a funnel. Productivity is the element that generative AI can do, and then everybody's like throwing AI agents and RAG at it. The hard part is identifying where you can differentiate and building that moat of data and context for the agents. That's where I think people like yourself who have been in the industry for a long time and maybe are even specialized in a specific industry or a specific vertical can build up that set of context that suddenly the agent or the RAG agent can pull on and ask the right questions, or at least inform the interviewer these are the questions to ask, given everything that we've heard so far and the candidate's background and resume.
Thanks for framing that up. That I know I pushed you out of your comfort zone there and had you talking about something theoretical, but you walked us through it well. Let's pull back for a second to where you've seen the most traction recently. And when I'm saying traction, depending on who you're talking to, AI is the dawn of the apocalypse and is about to supplant us as a species in the next 7 minutes, or it's a distance off and there's significant barriers and obstacles to reaching something that has a high degree of utility at a reasonable cost. And I'm curious, like your general opinion on this, and also where are you seeing these leaps that are in some ways almost surprising, where it's like, wow, I didn't see that happening that quickly.
Yeah, it's funny because when ChatGPT first came out and there was all that hype, and I tried it out for the first time, I was like, on that first camp, we're all going to die in about
Good.
5 years.
Good to hear.
Then I started using it, try to use it for work, and I try to use it for like projects on the side, and I kind of realized, oh my God, this thing makes so many mistakes. It's insane. And I realized, much like Jan Lee Kun, who's one of the Turing Award winners, he talks about this to an extent. So much like he realized earlier on, and I kind of realized after listening to him as well, you have these things which are basically stochastic parrots. They're not reasoning on their own. They can't reason in the way that we think about in terms of long range problems like multiple hops and steps. Basically, every time it's trying to like think about a sentence, each word that it's thinking ahead, there's a probability it's wrong and it'll send it down the wrong path. So the longer the answer, the more logic that you're involving, the more likely it's going to get wrong at the end of the day, right? So this is not something that's fixable with the current type of AI that we have today, right? To an extent, we can mitigate it. For example, and this is where things are going by leaps and bounds, is we're almost exhausted with text data, right? Like all the language models in the world are pretty much using the entire internet at this point as training data. And of course, they clean it up and everything else of that to avoid duplication or like some bad language or, ingrain some, let's say a racist philosophy within its mindset. Right. Those kind of things. You need to filter that. There's a lot of safety progress that's happening there. But what's really interesting is that they're going beyond text. They're going into things like video. They're doing things like visuals and audio. And the reason why that's important is, we have to place AI in the same progression that you might place a baby when they're first born, right? They learn about the world and have a representation of the world that isn't just text. It's, visual, three-dimensional space, time, right? Audio, things like that. And a lot of the logic that we pull in our heads and we verbalize through language is actually reasoning over multimodal data, right? And multimodal things. So one thing that blew my mind recently is I saw Figure AI. I don't know if you're familiar
Yes.
with that startup. It is the way that the robot was able to, or the I guess the android or the robot, whatever you want to call it, was able to like understand the person, interpret the language, and then reason over a three-dimensional problem, saying like, oh, the person's asking for a piece of food. There's an actual apple on the table because I have a computer vision algorithm that tells me that that's an apple. I know that's food. Okay, then the language part reasons over that multimodal data and then hands over the apple to the person when he requests a piece of food without directly representing the apple. And then also has a great conversation in the background as well. That was mind-blowing. That was absolutely mind-blowing. Now, can you imagine what that can do in a space like, fintech, capital markets, things like that, where you have these abstract thinking or, pricing over the value of assets that are in these different industries. Sometimes, if you think about construction or you think about supply chains, you think about all those other things, you need to start visualizing distances, space, weight, things like that. AI today might be able to, like on the text basis, might be able to reason a tiny bit based on the embedded knowledge in the training data and the previous reports about those industries. But a multimodal AI that's truly understanding distance, space, time, those kind of things in like a really good way, even though it'll probably still be wrong based on that current structure of AI, might be much less wrong than we'd expect. And that's where you're going to start seeing things like equities researchers, investors, people like that having little bits of their job, higher and higher levels of reasoning, getting automated over time. And this doesn't only apply to fintech. It could apply to almost every industry that we can think of. Yeah, and that's kind of where I see things going. It's like a gradual shift over the next 15 to 20 years. 15 to 20 years from now, if someone comes up with that way to get past the structural problem with AI, then all bets are off. kind of thing. My initial idea might come back.
So what you're seeing is great. So what you're seeing is these glimmers and these bursts of unexpected innovation with something like Figure. And I agree. I saw that and I was like, wow. And then my brain immediately goes to how and when you're talking about multimodal systems and capturing real world data and then mapping the context appropriately, it's shocking when you see those things. So the question is, are those behaviors inside of a controlled environment, or are they actually things that are able to be replicated with a degree of spontaneity? Am I going to go in and get the same thing if I do the same thing with that? Or is it a controlled experience?
Yes, there is a degree of control in those demonstrations, but what we often forget is that the rate of change. Compare that very first version of ChatGPT to what's available today through like their O1 model or like things like that. It's much better today. These things are geometric in growth, so yeah, it might be viewed as a trailer for the movie that's coming.
Okay.
In a year or two, and the way that I would put it is that you're going to find use cases that are simple, the way that generative AI, typical generative AI text-based use cases are discovered today that are relatively simple for the system to understand, process, and put out high quality. And where you got to think about it, and the product way to think about it is kind of saying, what is the threshold for error? Like, what is your pain tolerance, if you want to call it that way, your fault tolerance. If the fault tolerance is really low, let's say 1 or 2% hallucinations, and it's deadly if it ever goes above that in any circumstance, and users can ask any type of question. So basically, it has to have 1 to 2% hallucination rate across the board. Even the best models, even O1 doesn't do that. It's not humanly possible. So in those use cases where you might say it's like a doctor asking a question about a patient's health, right, to the model, or asking what they should do, you probably shouldn't rely on it because it's not going to be there. But if it's something that's fault tolerant, let's say like, hey, I'm creating something, and this is where you see a lot of it in today's terms. I'm creating a beautiful set of logos for my company, or I'm building some nice background materials for a video that I'm creating. And there's an openness to like, hey, the machine isn't quite exactly right. I can iterate, and it's okay if it is. It's a huge fault tolerance there, right? The natural workflow is back and forth, right? And instead of going back and forth between human beings, it's a slow process. Like, let me go back and rework this design. Takes, I don't know, God knows how long, right? And with the AI, it might be 30 seconds. You just have to say, I like that, but I want something else, right?
Yeah.
So in the computer vision and design space, I see a lot of concern. My wife works in design. She's worried that, hey, look, this thing is absorbing all the low-level ideation out of this particular industry, and I think that'll happen, across the board. I think the key for people who are in that, I can anticipate your next question. The key for people in that space is to learn how to use the AI in a better way to become much more productive and much more creative. And in the end, these things are pumping out statistical averages of the training data. If you create something net new, it won't be able to replicate that.
And that's the key, is the creation part, which once it's done can then be replicated, but before it can't.
No,
so
it cannot.
I got to take you back to the conversation with Georgian. And the reason why is that felt like a win, where you're saying we really found a way to identify opportunity. And this in itself feels like something that would attract a ton of attention. So if you're looking at different capital partners, VCs, private equity, companies with their own corp dev, and you look at the opportunity presented by this, I might know the answer to this and I don't want to assume, but why is this not a strategy for everyone? And what is the material size that it would take, and what are the tools it would take to do something?
That's a good question. And I'm going to lean on some of the experience that I had there as well directly, as well as some of the conversations I've had with other VCs, and trying to understand, what's the opportunity. At one point, we thought, could we take this internal thing and give it to other VCs and then do some kind of signal sharing, and everybody's happy and kumbaya, right? And we were exploring that opportunity over there. One of the challenges with these systems, the prediction might be right. How do you operationalize it in a workflow that the people like and feel attuned to? And that breaks down into two things. Can you physically alter the workflow? Like, is it like, hey, do I have the UX UI, the experience profile? Are you working on a CRM like Salesforce, or in VC's case, Affinity is like the typical CRM over there for VCs these days, right? And can we inject these predictions into the workflows that are native to that app, or can we alter those? Second issue is trust and belief. For a lot of AI, and this is generative AI to its core as well. How do humans build trust? It's over time seeing good quality elements come out. So if you have something that requires a big shift, and you have to figure out a way to give them exposure to the predictions and see immediate results, right? That's particularly difficult in VC because the results are going to come 6 or 7 years later when the ROI actually appears, right? So you can do things like backtesting and everything else of that. In the end, in private equity and venture capital and private capital markets especially, there is going to have to be an openness at the leadership level and a cultural level saying that, yes, this is at a risk, but we got to try it because we had to find some level of alpha somewhere, right? And sure, the data indicates it, but they got to have that emotional attachment, right, to that. So when you think about how the founders of Georgian, why they actually went into it, it was because they were tech founders themselves, and previously they knew the value of AI and data, so they took a big bet on this stuff, right? And to their credit, that's a big risk for like a big VC to throw so many headcount at these kind of things.
That was incredibly insightful. If you look at what you're doing now, can you frame up what you're doing now and why the move?
Yeah. So at the end of my time at Georgian, I kind of had this thirst to build more scalable systems that are more outward facing and going to like multiple enterprise clients and things like that. I think at some point in my future, I would like to found a B2B enterprise company. Maybe once I get a decade or so, maybe of more experience. I think the idea was to go into a place that already had like some large enterprise clients. Odaia, my current firm, sells machine learning systems to enhance the kind of sales pipelines for big pharma, right? So talking about like targeting and segmentation, things like that. Very much in line with what I did, just for a different use case. The advantage here is that we could, because the team is a lot bigger across the board, like just the front end staff, the data management and like the data platform side, right? The ML team could be a lot more focused on like the really advanced machine learning algorithms and like the real build. And that's what kind of attracted me here. Yeah. So I wanted to get that startup experience, maybe a unique way of like building up that hugely scalable, B2B enterprise serving machine learning systems.
And you're a product manager there.
Yes, I'm a senior product manager. I'm currently managing most, like I would say 80% of their machine learning products, and there's several in there.
Abe, that was awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time to sit with us and go through that. That was a very wide-ranging conversation in a very short period of time. And I know we were limited today, so I want to make sure that we have time to do a part 2. Are you okay with that?
Sounds great.
Okay.
Looking forward to it.
Well, thanks for this, and we'll catch up soon.
Thank you.